As a rabbi, I often get asked a lot of questions. As a conservative rabbi, I often don't get asked a lot of halakhic questions about Jewish law. But I got a question this last week that's one that I've heard different versions of, but I think it was from the youngest person it had ever been given from, or I have heard it from. A mother messaged me because their 8-year-old son asked them, why does God let things happen to good people? The age-old question, right? Why doesn't God stop the people that want to hurt and kill the Jews? And after the Shoah, this has been a question that's really been discussed in circles of Jewish philosophy. Jewish theology post the Holocaust has become its own area of study. It's a question asked by the Greek philosophers and everyone since. So it's a brilliant question. When people spend entire PhDs researching and studying, although I'm not sure what they then get employed to do after that PhD. But it's an important question. The problem with it is there are no answers that are really satisfying. There are answers that work in an academic circle, in the sterile environment of thought, but not answers that really help when you're sitting with someone grieving a tragedy, especially one of the magnitude of the terrorist attack on October 7th. When I was reading our Parsha this week, along with the news, it had me thinking of one of the answers that's often given to that question, what I wanted to try to share. One of the stories that came out after the attack was one of heroism. A father recounted to Israeli media how he became reunited with his son, who had called him hiding from the terrorists, unable to escape, knowing that no one was coming to rescue him. Later, his son called him up and said, "Dad, Major General Yair Cohen is coming to pick us up." The father says, "I said, what? Who?" He couldn't believe what he had heard. It's a retired staff general in the IDF, who in the last set of political party was head of the opposition. He was a figure. He was a retired man. He was in his 60s. He was no longer active. But the son repeated, "Major General Yair Golan, do you know him? He's bringing us to you." The dad went on in the interview, and he says, "V'kach haya," and it happened. Ha'adam hazeh, this man, ha'gibor hazeh, this hero, ha'malach hazeh, this angel showed up and brought my son to me. I have no words to thank him. I praise him. Ha'malach hazeh, this angel. Our Parsha this week, it's a very famous story. The 3 angels visit Abraham. They tell him what's going to happen with Sodom and Gomorrah, and the angels go on to visit the city and to rescue his nephew Lot and his children and his wife, who looks back and doesn't end well for her. For the story of the angels. But if you were reading in the Hebrew today, you may have noticed when they visit Abraham, it doesn't say 3 angels, 3 malachim. It says 3 anashim, 3 men. 3 people visited Abraham. And then there are the malachim, the angels that went to the cities. The Hebrew word for an angel is a messenger. And the Hebrew is ambiguous. It's never clear. Is an angel a divine being sent from the heavens? Or is an angel a person, a human being, with a divine mission, a message? Here doing an act of holiness, an act of something sacred. And our tradition plays with this ambiguity. Because each of us are malachim. Each of us are messengers of God. Each of us have the opportunity to be angels. So as I was reading this interview in the Hebrew, and I saw it was the word he used, malach, this angel. A malach hazeh, this angel rescued my son. It had me thinking about all of the angels that have been doing things this past month. Almost immediately after the attacks, There were over 15,000 volunteers in Israel, civilian volunteers working out of the Tel Aviv Exposition Center, doing all sorts of things before the government even responded. 15,000 individuals did whatever they could to help those in need. Within just 2 weeks, these 15,000 people are made up of over 2,000 volunteers from the high-tech sector that use their skills to identify missing and kidnapped Israelis, help verify those who were killed so families could have closure, help whittle down the list of tens of thousands who'd been displaced or moved, to figure out who was missing, who was kidnapped, who was killed, to help bring families together. Volunteers, not government employees, not the intelligence services, just volunteers who left their jobs to go work, to focus on helping. At the Exposition Center, this hub of volunteers, the underground parking lot became like an Amazon warehouse, just filled with massive piles of donated items from all over the world, from all over Israel, being sorted, repackaged, and delivered to those in need. Within 2 weeks, this group of volunteers delivered over 100,000 meals to families in need. They arranged accommodations for over 8,000 families who had been displaced by the attacks. It's incredible. These are the adults. There have been stories of thousands of children volunteering. Because as everyone over the age of 18 has gone off to the army, it's been called up for reserve duty. High school students, middle school students stepping up to help out. The story came out of Odelia Kay, a 16-year-old girl from Jerusalem, who started just going to help moms in her neighborhood with housework and childcare, whose husbands had been called up for reserve duty. Or Shafir Zimran, a 14-year-old from the city of Efrat, who started planning activities for younger children, whose moms needed a break, because again, all the men had gone off, along with many women as well, called up for reserve duty. Children volunteering to help others. These are two of thousands of stories. Many of you know already the work of the Organization for Victims of Terrorism in Israel. We've partnered with them, and we did a program with them, which you haven't watched, you should see on our YouTube page. Abby Moses, the head of the organization, which works on the ground with victims of terrorist attacks in Israel, supporting them, helping them in need, has been working nonstop with his organization, because in one day, thousands of new names were added to their list, their rosters. Richard Dermer, who runs the IVOW program, the Israel Victims of War, here in Canada, which brings members from the victims of terrorism in Israel who are bar bat mitzvah age to Canada for the summer. And you know they spend their last day here at the synagogue. We celebrate a big party with them before they go back to Israel. He got on a flight and went to Israel to go help out, to do that work. You've seen it all over. The rallies, the volunteers from around the world, the fundraisers. Over $60 million raised from our federation here in Toronto alone. These are all the work of angels. And I had a teacher who would say that God isn't in the cancer, but God's in the doctors, the nurses, the staff, the scientists fighting cancer, everyone who's helping the person in need. See, God isn't in the fire, but in the men and women who run towards the fire to put it out, to save people. That's where God is in these moments. I can't answer the question satisfactorily why God lets these things happen. There's no satisfactory answer to that question. But at least personally, it helps me to focus instead on where I do see God. Not in the atrocity committed by Hamas, but in the way our community has come together to support each other, to help each other, to lift each other up, to bring healing. There's a midrash that when the Israelites would go to war, Moses took 12,000 troops, 1,000 from each of the tribes, to be in the army. But then he took another 1,000 from each of the tribes to pray for their well-being. We can't all be serving in the IDF. We can't all be the malachim on the ground helping out in Israel. But I'm reminded when Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marched with Dr. Martin Luther King. His famous quote was that day he was praying with his feet. Well, just like the 1,000 that Moses had praying for each 1,000 in the military, the rest of us can be praying too. Not just with our words, though, with our hands, with our deeds, with our actions, with our wallets, with our mouths by speaking out for Israel. All of this is the work of Malachim. We don't see God's presence in the tragedy. We find God's presence in the angels who are doing the work of repair, the work of tikkun. The angels who are seeking to make the world a better place, a brighter place, even in the face of darkness. And that's what we need to continue to be. Angels of hope, angels of healing. Shabbat Shalom.